Mere Mortals, one and all, welcome back to another edition of the Conversations. I bet you have missed us out. So today I had a wonderful conversation with the lovely Tofe Evans. Now, you might have heard his name. He's looking around, in some of the websites, people saying he's a bit crazy. And, you'll hear some crazy stories. In particular, if you want to hear about what it's like to run down Mt Everest from base camp, amongst other things, or how about running over 200 kilometers. Yeah, pretty intense. But amongst that, we also talked about mental health, depression, the stages of life that Tofe went through in terms of his party boy idea and identity, which then turned into positivity from running and endurance, but then that also causing him to attach identity to running and then relapse, I guess, again into another depressive state. So we talked through that story in a hope of sharing with you, to the listeners, what it's like to go through that, talking in terms of where he is today and some of the practical examples that he uses to further on his life and ensure that he continues to support others as well as himself. So without further ado, I hope you enjoyed this conversation with Tofe as much as I did. You implement customer insights and data storytelling strategies that adapt to the future of work. So already, I like the wording. In your own words though, what is it you do day to day?
Yeah, sure. So I am an ex-recruiter who's made a pivot, more focusing on talent analytics. So that's doing a lot of insight pieces, educating our clients, our following on the trends that are happening in the future of work. Mm-hmm. Because what made me fall into this role now was what happened in 2020. Mm-hmm. And noticing all the change, and change is probably more constant, obviously change is the biggest constant, but for me to focus on that, I'm noticing it's using more of my strengths, and it's being a massive value add for our clients.
So from in a professional sense, have you always been in that customer insight storytelling space professionally, or were you doing something beforehand?
Funny you mention that. I've gone through probably 3 or 4 career pivots. Okay. So I used to be doing mechanical engineering, designing. So maybe that's where the design comes from. Mm-hmm. And then I went into more of a endurance sports charity route. So that's probably where the people skills came from. And then for me, I fell into more recruitment and now HR kind of space. So it's utilizing both technology and data and design, mixing with the human element.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
And obviously getting the insights from all of those pivots that you've sort of stumbled along the way in life and I want to touch into this one, and then we'll dive a little bit into obviously you, Tofe, as a human, because I did, as always, do a little bit of research on the individuals I'm having a chat to. And, you've spoken in the past about speaking and sort of, personal speaking and doing the gigs and whatnot. And I found a video, and it was a 3-minute video, and it kind of gave a little bit more of an insight about who you are as a human, the endurance events that you've sort of undertaken, and everything else that comes into it. So I want to kind of lead into, there's a professional side of things. And if you want to probably know a little bit more about Tofe and his professional insights, I reckon go and check him out on the LinkedIn that we'll probably discuss a little bit later. But I want to chat to you about the endurance events, personal history, and mental illness, because I think it's something that is ignored a lot of the time, especially for men, whether it's the stigma, whether it just, you don't feel comfortable talking about it. And maybe sharing a little bit of your story and the insights behind that and the learnings, which a lot of people might be too afraid to talk about or might not have experienced it. It might be something that comes along the way. So to kind of get us into that, I really want to know about running down Mt Everest. So where did this stem from?
Oh, how do I say this? My friend and I were doing, to give some context, my friend and I were doing a plethora of endurance races for charity. And we managed to turn 20 into 40 in 1 year. We just thought, screw quality, let's do quantity. And my body felt that one at the end of it. There's more than one a fortnight. And then we focused for the next year, focus on quality, not quantity. So let's just do 10 big events and still have like a charitable cause, have that gratitude piece in there to give back. And because we were doing everything for youth at the time, it was whether it was youth mental health and being stuck in a hyperbolic chamber for 48 hours in training, or running around 100 meter, like a 400 meter track for 24 hours for a family that lost their dad, who was like an endurance athlete. This one was, the idea came about because a friend of mine runs a business who is Shark Tank invested, and his daughter had cystic fibrosis. And it turns out a fair amount of my friends had cystic fibrosis.
Wow. Okay.
And the correlation was with Mt Everest and cystic fibrosis is it's hard to breathe. And this race came up in my feed, in my Facebook feed, and decided to take a punt on it because it's, I don't know, something had drawn me to something that, like the mammoth size of it. And to give context, it's not running from the top. First of all, that's very expensive. And I don't know if anyone can, unless, I don't know.
It'd be a dangerous run from the very top. It'd be very dangerous. But it would be above base level?
No, so it was from Everest Base Camp, and
Gotcha.
it was running to Namche Bazaar. But to give some context, I did climb higher than base camp, so as high as like Camp 2, which was pretty cool. No oxygen needed. It was like an incredible experience. But to do the race itself was a nightmare. Like, made me really value my health and just not take it for granted when I'm back at sea level. And it taught, being in Nepal was one of my favorite countries to ever visit, because it taught me that the poorest people are the happiest because of the material that's ripped away from them. So they're just grateful to have the bare minimum. They're grateful to have their families. They're grateful to have shelter. They're grateful to have water, just the things we actually need.
Yeah.
And that's what it taught me. I guess it probably helps out of a Filipino mom, and it's almost the Philippines, where mum's from.
Yeah.
And Nepal can be very similar. So maybe made me feel like I was going back to those sort of like roots.
Yeah.
But that race in itself, it still kind of scares me. Just,
Okay.
Yeah.
There's a level of, I think, to be scared to a particular extent is also very powerful because it's pulling you maybe out of the comfortable zone. Yeah, the comfort zone and being a little bit uncomfortable, and that might be scary, but it could be scary because of unknown, sort of the fear of the unknown, as opposed to fear for something objectively happening to you. So we're talking about Mount Everest, right? So people probably are picturing amazing race. I'm sure it was hard, right? I'm sure it was tough. And if anyone's thinking about, like, even now, I'm thinking about it now, that would be cool, but hell, I'm sure it would be hard. And maybe you might think, what was the experience like? I want to ask you, what's the experience like there? Why did you do it? But I think I want to scale it back a little bit. Sure. Go back a bit more. And obviously the reason as to why you got into endurance events in the first place, right? What led you to that path? So I want to kind of go back before the endurance events.
Yeah, go for it.
Taking us back to a little bit of younger self and maybe your traveling self. Because I know we've talked about you and when you actually went traveling for your first time, I believe, overseas. Can you sort of talk through those times when you were traveling, and maybe in the space of when did you realize something was going wrong at that time?
When I was focusing on trying to get other people's approval. So bit of growing up and through school, massive people pleaser, trying to get other people's love and attention when I wasn't getting it myself. And that's carried through every aspect of my life. It fell into relationships. It fell into work. It fell into whether it was an intimate relationship or just really close friends. And
what did that look like in practice?
Saying yes to everything.
Okay.
Self-sabotage. Looking at myself in the mirror and not happy with that person. So trying to be someone else. And identity as well. I was trying to live the identity of someone else. So I would essentially like fill my body up with drugs and alcohol because I wasn't happy with the person, and numbing a void of some sort. So it's very paradoxical because I'm doing it to numb, but I'm also doing it so I can feel.
Yeah. Okay. Right.
And there was a lot of emotional trauma there that I hadn't dealt with. So for me, it was carrying the identity of this party boy coming from Australia, traveling throughout the States and Canada and Europe. And people had known me for being this party guy. So I had to keep it up, and I'm going to be known for something. That's what I'm telling myself. It's like,
was it an immediate identity shift for you? Like, was it you stepped from Australia overseas and it was straight away, oh, I'm going to be a party boy. I'm going to straight go to doing drugs, having a lot of alcohol? Or was it a progressive build to sort of that stage?
I would say it was slightly progressive, but as soon as people could tell I was from a different country and then they associated, oh, Australia, you guys know how to drink. It's like I took that and I ran with it.
Were you, I'm assuming there would have been some benefits that you were getting from that, in terms of there would have been something that was supporting the fact that you were doing that by way of maybe associating with people, or just being seen as, oh, cool, he wants to party, come along and join. So was that happening to help you on that path?
Of course. It was being fueled because I thought I was getting their attention. I'm being loved. They're liking me. That was the thing. I just wanted to be liked by everyone.
Yeah.
And I couldn't like myself, or I couldn't love myself. That was the issue. And that just spiraled into like a deep, heavy depression, anxiety. Like a chick that I was in a relationship with that failed. I think I lost my passport overseas. Yeah. That helped. Like typical traveler stuff, like spending all my money, and probably lost my purpose as well. Like I didn't know who I was. That was probably the biggest one. I didn't know who I was, didn't know what I stood for. And I was too busy looking in the mirror, wasn't happy with that person. And I was not present. I was living too far in the past, which is depression, in my opinion, when it's fatalist. And then the other side, I was living too far in the future, and I was a strategist as with anxiety. Yeah. And I wasn't able to harness that energy into visualization. I was using it to the self-deprecating voices I'm telling myself. And I think I've heard you say on a podcast where our emotions lead to actions. And then it was exactly that. That was an anecdotal experience of that.
And I want to pick on the word of depression, because like I've experienced sadness, I've experienced being down, but there is a distinction of being depressed and that feeling. I can't say that I'll say that thankfully, that I've been so depressed that I couldn't move from my bed, or I felt like I was in this almost suicidal level, like not to that extent. And I'm not asking you from now knowing everything that you've gone through, at the time, how did you realize that, heck, I'm depressed? 'Cause I know a lot of people might just think that, oh, well, I'm down, I'm having a terrible time, I'm just not moving, I'm just watching Netflix all day. How do you go about differentiating at the time that you were that depressed, that you had to do something?
Probably because it got very suicidal. And voicing that to people, they're having to be that friend that cares and say, this is what's going on, without me realizing. Because I'm very unconscious at this point. It's seeing a doctor, it's pretty bad. And having those trusted people around me to say what's actually going on, that was a wake-up call. I wasn't even able to have awareness for myself. That was the scary part. I'm just, my little boy is steering the bus, right?
Yeah. With just while you're talking about that, some people might be hearing them and be like, what do you mean little boy?
Yeah, right.
Just, can you explain that for people? What the little boy means, or the little girl, if you're watching as well?
Yeah, sure. So in us, there's a lot of emotional trauma that we've gone through and it usually starts as children. It's modeled up from us, from either our parents or siblings, or any sort of societal people that in society that we could be neighbors, could be growing up in a church, for example, and they would have modeled behavior that would have essentially created triggers for us that is carried on through every aspect of our lives today. And for me, unworthiness has been a strong shadow or trigger of mine that I never got, say, dad's love as a kid, as a 8-year-old. And when I snap to that trigger, when I'm reacting, it's that 8-year-old Tofe or that 5-year-old Tofe that's deciding to come out. So hopefully they gave context or at least an example of what does that actually mean. And it may be because I haven't at the time I hadn't properly processed that emotion, because as guys we're told that if we don't cry or else it's weak.
Yeah. And
that also in that category falls don't cry, don't be angry, like just
be the man. You got there's a, whether you want to call it a stigma or their expectation, it's a societal expectations of what the eminent male should be like. And if you're deviating from it, then you're being unsuccessful. You're not meeting the criteria.
Exactly.
So, and the other point as well you mentioned obviously is you had a bit of a trusted network or trusted support there. I'm not sure whether that was family or friends, but was that what ended up being able to help you or even save you from that sort of depressive state? Or was there something even personally within you that triggered those movements? Like, would you say that without a support network there, things could have been really different?
Yeah, I'd say that was the catalyst. And that journey of going through depression, anxiety went for probably 6 to 8 months. It was a very, very dark time. Like that, no one should be in that state for that long. And I masked it very well. Like I just put my head in the sand about what was going on, just didn't want to ask for help, and just tied to my bed. And everyone has their own ways of self-sabotage. And mine at the time was oversleeping and just eating and just the self-talk as well. And there was a lot of shame around that. Like I was living in shame, which is probably what kills people, if anything, when it comes to suicide.
Yeah, okay.
It was that shame of probably the sadness that I hadn't probably felt. I hadn't had a proper cry in so long. And I think if I'm really digging through the archives, I did see a doctor at one point. He prescribed me to medication. And look, anyone that's listening, I'm not saying if it's a right or wrong way. That's what I was doing. I was able to identify that for me, I'm speaking on behalf of myself. I'm not speaking on behalf of anyone else. Like they were making me worse.
Yeah.
So I decided to quit those cold turkey. And being vulnerable, when I was able to be vulnerable with people I could trust, it was almost like therapy.
Yeah.
And it was to kickstart my healing journey as well. So I didn't know how to ask for help. And it was probably years later that I still couldn't figure it out. Yeah. I'm able to now. And that's why I think it's a blessing in disguise, because I can look at it now and be like, I'm grateful to go through that. What was the common factor with what people were telling me was, you need to look after your health, man. Like I was on this absolute 9-month bender of drinking and doing drugs. And probably all the self-talk probably didn't help either. And trying to get people's validation. That was very heavy on my shoulders, trying to carry everyone's problems, and thinking, I was compassionate, and it was really my ego getting in the way. And when I focused on myself, that was probably the big one. Focusing on myself and focusing on my health, and just exercising. That was probably the kickstart of it.
So, and because I want to get this idea as well for people listening. So before you actually traveled as well, did you see it as going to another country, partying, having a really good time? That is, for the definition of that bounded time, success. Like that is having a great time. That is what I'm there for. And so afterwards, obviously, you looked at health, and it's important to know, because I think a lot of people, whether it's not to that level, but I've had, ideas in my past where it's like, I want to go to, I'm seeing people in Greece having all this good time and drinking and partying. How fun would that be? Let's just go do it for 4 months. And almost the idea of, what it could be, you feel like you only look at the pros and you don't see all the potential negatives and the side effects, which are things like your health, your connections, everything else that you're leaving behind, and almost weighing them up. You're just looking at this fair few positives, and you're not looking at all the other impacts that you may have. So you obviously then started focusing on health, and this sort of brings us into, I guess, more endurance events that you started doing for charity as well. So what was the time period between going cold turkey, trying to focus on your health, to doing all these big, massive endurance events. What was that? Was that fairly quickly?
It was, I would say, a huge ramp up. Throughout school, I did sport, but I never did team sport because I would always get picked last. And that carried on through me. And that actually was that was fuel for my endurance races. I was unfortunately carrying all the judgments of being the chubby kid, the kid that always got picked last.
Were you a chubby kid when you were younger?
I was, yeah.
Man, you wouldn't imagine that now.
No, I look at it now. Yeah, I was quite chubby.
Yeah.
And I thought, okay, for me, health equaled sport. And what's a sport I could do? And ended up being running because it was the cheapest sport I could do.
Yep.
And I could probably run with my thoughts and I can get slim quick and do what I need to do. But I was able to, I'm very grateful I have this, like able to break it down to what can I do today? And it was just get to the letterbox. Because when I'm confined to my bed for 16 hours, the biggest thing I could do was put on a pair of joggers and just get to the letterbox. That's it. Go back to bed.
Just with that as well. So I want to highlight that.
Sure.
It's super important. Whether it's in that depressive mode, whether it's, on just a general task and it's just putting one foot in front of the other. Did you know that? Did you read about that? Did someone tell you about that? How did you know I just got to do something? Because just the spark of doing is hard for individuals. What did you just read it somewhere? Was it just internal? Like, I've got to do something here. I'm just going to take that step.
I would say it was internal.
Okay.
Something brought me there. And it was focusing on small wins because I felt like such a loser. If I had to flip the script, it's like, how can I feel like I've won today somehow? And getting to the letterbox doesn't sound like much. It really doesn't. But after being through years of living with anxiety and depression, it's probably the best thing I could have done for myself because I was actually doing something for myself. I wasn't doing it for someone else. I wasn't doing it for the validation of anyone else. I was doing it for my internal validation, my own acceptance. And leaving the letterbox turned to, let's just get to the end of the block now. And then the next day, let's run 1 kilometer. And slowly built that up to, I thought, maybe I can do a stretch goal. Maybe I can run a marathon. And then having that thought, I'm so grateful I went through it because I actually caught up with a friend for St. Paddy's. We had a few nights on the drink, a few hours on the drink, I should say. And I told him that morning and he said, really? And the next day I'm like, yep, I'm actually going to do this. So I stuck with my word, decided to train for a marathon and when's the next marathon? And then, well, okay, let's do that one. Reverse engineered it. All right, what do I need to do? Downloaded a marathon plan. And did it. So
I mean, and it is, that's fairly, it's good to see that it was a fast build up. So you got into the marathon, which then I'm assuming led to, I can do this. Let's go to more. Let's go longer distance. There's the Mt Everest. There was, I believe you did a big swim event as well.
Yeah, there was, how far was that?
It was nippies.
It was 12 hours of swimming in a pool.
That's no joke.
It was for nippers, so like the junior surf lifesavers, and it was to raise money for them. And fortunately was grateful to have relationship with like the Bonn high performance team, the Bonn Uni high performance team. And you can use that pool if you want. So just doing laps, I think I got maybe 17 kilometers swimming in a pool, absolutely knackered after that.
That's huge. Yeah.
But I do want to touch on when I was doing, I know I'm going over this relatively really quickly. When I was doing the marathon plan, the big thing it taught me was discipline and commitment. So I was able to use loss aversion. So I paid for it. I better do this. And it's almost like guilting myself. But when I was able to do it and I said, you know what, nothing else is going to get in the way. This is my main priority, this bloody marathon. And what I need to do is the training to lead up to it. So I made sure to actually stick with the training, whether I had to walk it or run it, do what I feel. I think I gave myself a few off days, even on the days I was meant to run, just to rest up. But that taught me about discipline. It taught me about mindset. When there's so much talk about how long does a habit take, and it used to be 21, now it's debunked, and now it's actually 66. When I'm doing 4 months of training, that's almost 120 days. So I was able to rewire neural pathways to go, okay, I'm actually looking after myself. And I think everything just fell with that. Like, I feel like everything followed with that. Like, I was able to eat better. I was sleeping better. I wasn't like drinking any alcohol or taking any drugs. I was just focusing on this one core thing. And then the marathon itself was one of the most beautiful experiences I've ever had, because it emulated what my depression, anxiety was like.
Ah, right. Okay.
Like the journey of it. So on race day, didn't have much sleep the night before because I was incredibly anxious. And on the day of, I'm not realizing this, but every first time runner is going through the exact feeling of, oh my God, what the hell have I done to sign up for this thing? Right?
Yeah. Because generally, you know, I don't know how your training went, but generally when you're doing a marathon, you don't run the marathon distance before the marathon race. That's normally what the training plans sort of go about. I don't know if you followed that sort of idea. So when you are running the marathon, that's the first time you're running that distance.
Yeah.
So it's the anxiety of like, am I even going to make it? Like, what's going to happen here? So yeah, and I can imagine obviously having anxious thoughts already built up within you, it can be a pretty daunting thing.
Yeah, and you're right. Like the furthest I'd ran was maybe 32 kilometers. And ironically, that's when the marathon starts at 30K mark. So once the gun went off, we're all starting to run and just eased into it. And I'm thinking, this is not even that bad. 20K in, yep, all fine. 30K, got a massive rush of adrenaline because the entire crowd is there. And then onwards, that next 12K was like being in a war zone. But it was like almost having that intense depression again. It felt like then the anxiety's kicking off going, are we going to get there? This is the furthest we've ever ran. And I just focused on one step at a time. Seeing people with ambulances at 40K mark, thinking, oh my God, they got 2K to go. And then crossing that finish line gave me not only goosebumps, but like, oh man, like joy, tears of joy that I was able to go through that. And then it felt like I had a bit of purpose after that, because I was able to do something for myself. And it was so validating because it was for me.
Yeah, certainly.
No one said, hey, you should run a marathon. And
it was, you decided that, you made it happen. And I want to, because I wrote here for discipline, and I think I just want to highlight there that last 10Ks, right? And that's when maybe the real marathon begins and when the anxiety kicks in. Did you feel like in that moment, that's when you saw the discipline of just the one step in front of the other, of just keeping on going and getting to that end point? What did discipline sort of mean for you then, right? In that sort of moment for it. And when you finished, just want to kind of describe that particular feeling. Were you able to just compare it to like anxiety up to that point in terms of, oh, I feel like I've done it. I've been able to conquer my anxiety.
Good question. So the first one was that last 10K, I didn't want to let myself down, which was a great thing. Like, I've got my back. Let's do this. So I'm accountable for my own actions. No one's accountable for my actions. Like, I'm accountable for myself. That was probably the first thing that came, like, that I had. And I was able to essentially harness that. And afterwards, I knew that, oh my God, I've done this. I want to do another one now. Like, oh my God, this is incredible. But I never thought the anxiety would be over. I still don't think. I probably struggle with anxiety still on the day. It's still quite prominent in me. The depression can kick in, but at least I have awareness of what's actually driving that. But anxiety will always be there with me. Because I tend to live in the future too much, and the what if and the worry starts to go crazy. So I make sure that I meditate every morning. So I have some sort of breath work to keep me present. But with what you said, no, I didn't think it was ever going to end.
No, it's good. I wanted to kind of understand it, because it'll help me even understand further this next part of the story, because this is where I reckon, people listening, and even me, I've sort of listened a little bit to the story of you telling it up to this point. And I thought, excellent, he's done it. He succeeded. In the proverbial hero's journey, you went through your dangerous path. You got through all the scary things. You managed to get up. Then you're doing this endurance event, you're giving back to charity. everything's going well. But I want to talk to, this part of the story I'm not really quite aware of, so I want to kind of get your help here to understand really what happened. It was a long distance run, a very long distance. I can't remember exactly the distance, what it was, but something happened in this run. And I guess to preface it at this moment, I would say that you had a pretty strong identity that you were someone who did endurance events, who was healthy and fit. And this was keeping you disciplined, energized, depression was away, everything was going well. Talk me through that particular race and, what happened. And even if you can recall what year that was, kind of put us in a place and time that we can imagine it to.
Sure. So in the middle of nowhere, Scotland, this is where we are now, right? So this is August 2018. There was a race that came up and it was running 345 kilometers across Scotland from one side to the other, or 214 miles for any Imperial listeners. Yep. And I did this one for two reasons. It was a selfish reason and a selfless reason. So I'll speak on behalf of the selfless. I remembered that I turned my life around thanks to running. I used it as fuel. I used it as an outlet. And I wanted to do this because I was able to turn myself around 180 or a full 360. I'm going to do something, the scariest thing I've ever done. Yep. And then the selfish reason was, ironically, for all the people that have got told no their entire lives and have actually listened to other people's no's, and it's prevented them from going wherever they wanted to be. Yep. So I believe in the power of saying no. There's boundaries for me. But when someone had been told, no, you cannot write a book because you're not a good writer, and then they listen to them and it may paralyze them from whatever, or maybe they wanted to start that business, but they were scared, whatever, because they listened to too many no's so I wanted to show that using perspective as Tofe, as a human being, he's able to do this. Maybe I can ask that girl on a date or that guy on a date. Yep. Maybe I can write that book. Maybe I can. So it was using perspective, not comparison. There's a difference between the difference there, huge difference. And that's why I ran it. So 100 people had the chance to run this. It's like there's a running resume.
Okay. It's like a CV for running.
Yeah.
That's amazing. Okay. Yeah.
And it was to done so many ultra marathons. What's the furthest distance you've ran? And was fortunate enough to run this. So we're in Scotland. We're in a town called, I think it's near Dumfries. I can't even remember the place. Where is it? But it's in like the most southwestern point. Yep. And it's literally going up the guts. Okay. And there was 11 checkpoints, and it was a staged race. So for anyone that doesn't know what a staged race is, there are races that might be 300 kilometers, for example, and it's spread over 5 days. So you only have to run the 100 kilometers over 5 days, each day. Yeah. So the person that's running it has to be done within, say, 12 hours, rest for 12, and then they kickstart the next day. This one, 3 days, got to get to start to finish. And there are checkpoints. So if you want to have a rest for, say, 40 minutes, an hour, and you've got time, then that's fine.
Right, okay.
And I must have gotten the first 140 kilometers was easy. I know that sounds crazy.
I know, I was going to say, to listeners at home, we've had a couple of people who have run 100Ks on the podcast as well, Tanya. Yep. And even then I'm like, she was like, it's quite hard, difficult. So 140Ks, I'm like, wow, that just sounds intense to me. But yes, easy in the context.
If I break it down to when we were running the marathon, that first 70% is the easiest part. Yep. And then the marathon starts the last 30. So when for example, if we're going to the gym and we're working out for an hour, if we're focusing on the clock, we can often tend to look in the last 30%. When's it going to end? If we're working 9 to 5, about 4 o'clock, is it going to end? So that's
a great perspective. Yeah.
Yeah. So I was able to push that bar back. So if I was running a marathon, I'd always think that I had 50K. Yeah, so I'm able to finish it. So I trained myself, and I'd done probably a good 50 events leading up to it. So I had built the resilience and the stamina and the endurance that almost like enjoying the purposeful suffering. So I'm like, the first miler or the first 100 miles will be fine. So I got to about 100, because it's not flat, it's through like hills, through cow paddocks.
Yeah, I'm just imagining like the rolling hills of Scotland and some fog going through and cows just randomly in places, just watching this crazy man running through, be like, wow, okay.
I do remember vivid points at 2 a.m. where I got off track and I'm having to climb over barbed wire fences. I've been on my feet for maybe 18 hours.
Yeah.
And I vlogged the whole thing.
Yeah. Jeez.
I'll send it to you if you want to watch it, but
that would be amazing.
I got to sleep for like an hour. So my guy that was race crewing, he's like, yep, have a sleep. Do what we need to do. Washes my feet.
Yeah.
Absolute homie. Loved it. And if we fast forward, it just got harder and harder. And I'm hallucinating at this point, day 2 and then day 3. I started to my body started to break down. And there was one point where I'm running with 2 other guys because we met up on the checkpoints. We ended up running. We found one of the racers unconscious on there. So we had to wait.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Like these races are no joke. Like, do you have to sign a declaration?
A waiver, yeah. Had to get like medical clearance before we went. The doctor literally like, yeah, you're fine. Whatever, sign off. Like there's no like blood test or anything like that.
Yeah, 300 kilometer race. Off you go.
Yeah.
Enjoy.
And when we had to stay at the cold waiting for help to come, I don't know, the body may have gone into shock for a bit. They gave us extra hours, but my body started to just break down. I just didn't care about my eating patterns or anymore. I just wanted to get it done. And because when I rushed it, and it's like anything I've learned now, when I rush something, it's not going to work. So there is a video of me breaking down about 280 km or 180 miles. And I had to pull out, and that was probably the greatest thing that ever happened to me because it taught me so much about identity. And I was carrying that and I was never going to let go of it because people had known me as the party boy.
Yep.
And now they're knowing me as this ultra runner, this inspiring guy, right? And after that, I said to my guy, I don't think I want to run ever again. And that led me down to another spiral of depression, anxiety, probably more depression than anxiety. And I'm going back to Tofe from 2014 that had a mental episode.
Yep.
Had another one because I didn't know who I was. So I thought it was, maybe it's because that girl broke up with me, or maybe it's because, it could have been anything at the time. Maybe it's because I had to change jobs and I had to change careers. It wasn't. It's because I lost myself as identity.
Yeah.
And then fast forward, one of my dear mates, he said, look, you need to go to this group. I've been going to this for years and speak to this guy. He'll help you. And that's why I'm very fortunate to go through that in the hurt because it's taught me about my emotional triggers and my emotional trauma and what I've carried through the majority of my life to use that as just like an insatiable curiosity about myself and around humans as well, and to see and the psychology of it. And now I'm learning how to facilitate in the space, which is a great gratitude piece for me to give back. So I think I'll always have that, but I don't have to run 400 kilometer races or anything like that anymore. Yeah. I don't have to.
Do you still run?
No.
Right. Okay.
I do channel my energy in other sports. So I got injured March last year. Haven't been 100% since. And I injured myself through the first year of my running in the 40 events. And I just did DIY physio. I let adrenaline take over. I just didn't want to let anyone down, but I was letting myself down. So I thought, nip this in the bud, actually go see physio, do what I need to do. Probably done some proper damage, running thousands of kilometers on a bad knee. Yeah. But I still do sport. I still taken up yoga. I've taken up tennis, like gym, all that stuff. But I realized I don't have to do the crazy runs. And funnily enough, because I was the chubby kid at school, because I was the kid that got picked last, I feel that, and it saddens me to say this, that throughout my entire endurance career, if you want to call it that I never did it for myself. Part of it was doing it to tell those kids to shut them up when I just carried those judgments. Yep. So I was running away from something, not running to something. So now I look at it, I'm like, if I'm going to go for a run, like I got up early this morning, went for a walk, and then I jogged half of it. Yeah. Okay. And it was literally like 1 kilometer. And I'm like, this is back to basics. These are small wins.
Yeah.
I know I can, if I wanted to run a marathon, I probably could run a marathon, and I'm not ever going to close it off. One day I will run a marathon, and it will just be, this is actually for me.
Yeah, exactly. It's almost for the joy of doing it, for the fact that you're like, oh, I want to do this. It is for me. It isn't to shut someone else up. It's not because someone told me I can't do it. You know, that they are by all means reasons that could drive you to do something, but there are better reasons, and there are more internal reasons that can lead you to achieving outcomes that are better. Right. Something around that really sparked me. I just want to hear you talk about it. It's identity.
Yeah.
And it can be powerful. It can be harming. I just want to get your takes on it. Do you feel like that identity piece, you experienced it in two ways? One was the party identity, which led to that first sort of episode. Second was I'm the runner, the endurance runner, which then when that stopped, or you felt like it stopped, it was again, it's my identity taken away from me. Would you say then that identity is something that we want to irk away from, or is it just building the right identity? What's your sort of thoughts behind that?
Yeah. For me, it's detachment. It's knowing that in this container I have, there's all these little dots, and those dots represent a different thing of me. So, my job, for example, I was a recruiter and I'm no longer a recruiter. Now I'm in talent analytics. Or if for whatever reason, unfortunately, like I wish this never happened, but like if my parents died, I'm no longer a son. So I have to learn how to detach and surrender. That's what is going to get me through. It's understanding that nothing lasts forever, and cherish it while I can and live in the present moment. That's the thing. That's the only way that's got me through. And I've learned this the hard way, unfortunately, putting my body through either substance abuse, I should say, or putting myself through insane events just to come up with that lesson there. And it's realizing that it could all be gone tomorrow, and I have to be totally cool with it. Yeah.
And it makes me think of a particular quote. I might be butchering this, from Nietzsche, and Jordan Peterson talks about it a lot, which is basically suffering being inextricably linked with existence, and the fact that, you know, if you were given absolutely everything you think is like amazing, life is done, I've got all the money in the world, everything you want, as human beings ourselves, we will look to find some sort of suffering, or we will encounter suffering, because we can't imagine a state where everything's absolute perfection. That's not a state that humans can play in, right? So it's inextricably linked that you have suffering to existence. From all that you encountered, right? And you made mention a little bit, you know, earlier as well. It's kind of like the individual who gets cancer and they go, it was the worst thing, but the best thing to happen to me, because it gives you perspective. So for you, was it the perspective to see the suffering through all those places that you went through that now you look back on that helped you to be so strong? Because you're now, you know, for all intents and purposes, I've seen you sort of at the group. I've seen you, you know, when we had a coffee, and you're a very strong man in terms of the way that you can communicate and talk, and you do speaking engagements. You've written your book now. You communicate well. Do you feel it was a lot of that, or was there something else?
Yeah, it's a good question. It does come back down to having perspective. When I've been able to reflect on the adversity I've gone through, any piece of adversity, it's like, even if we use you an example one, like for you to leave Colombia and come to Australia, and imagine all the fear that would have came through that. English wasn't a primary language. And for you to go through that mindset of learning and getting through that, and for yourself now, who can speak immaculate English, to have perspective around that, I'm sure there's a massive gratitude piece that you're probably thinking, wow, I'm actually partly grateful to have gone through that, because it creates compassion for other people that might be learning a second language. So I learnt that. It made me and that's probably why I'm very drawn to this men's work, because there's a lot of guys there that struggle with mental health and illness, and I know what that's like, and I will never humiliate them, because I know exactly how they feel. Maybe not exactly, but I know what those symptoms can feel like.
You can sympathize with them.
You
can understand that.
I can empathize as well, yeah.
And you can understand, because the brain's a funny thing, right? It's like, it's a $1 million brain in all the humans that exist. And sometimes the idea and the emotions that you feel they are specific to you, but they're not new. They've existed for a very long time across generations. People have felt this before. You know, it's not just if you're feeling anger, fear, joy. They're not new feelings, but they are feelings as real as it can be to you. But other people can emphasize and understand what you are feeling. For people listening, because, you know, we're talking in a lot of ideals, do you still find today, even today as of now in the last couple of weeks, do you still find, you know, everything's not joyful and completely fine? Do you still feel like, I had a really terrible day and I'm angry, or I'm fearful, or I'm still anxious? Do you feel that way? One. Two, if you do, what are the practical things you do nowadays to deal with that?
Sure. So I think it's actually going back to what you were saying before, and I think this will tie in here. If I have no suffering, I'll try and make some sort of purposeful suffering. Like, what can I do to put a challenge in my day so that I know that I can get on with my day, because life is full of challenges and it will be hard. And even when things feel smooth sailing, I still go through those bouts. Like today I was angry at something. And for me, how do I express or process this properly? Does it mean screaming into a pillow? And how do I get it out of my system?
Yep.
But as what I've learned, anger is actually the guardsman to sadness. And if I need to cry, I'll probably cry. Like I'll get it out, and I'm happy to sit in with that. And it's taken me years to figure out how to do this. I remember I was with a friend, and we went for like a run, like I think a 6K run. And then afterwards we had a gym workout, and I was just feeling so on edge about stuff. And what I thought was anger.
Yep.
And I went to a park on my way home, and I remember just sitting there and sitting with it. And I just started bawling, crying. And it was one of the best releases I've ever had. And that's where I think it's so important that as guys, we do have those cries, because it's a release. We're not going to hold on to it. And we're not going to take it out on our partners, and we're not going to take it out on our families, or we're not going to take it out on our colleagues and ourselves as well. So the thing is, some people don't know how to tap into that. So for me, it's who do they need to ask for help? And there are those community groups out there, like the I groups from MKP, or Mankind Project, I should say. Or there are the psychologists out there, because it seems to be a bit of a taboo. It can be a taboo topic for people. It's like, oh, do I think I'm crazy? Well, there was a stat I read the other day where 4 out of 5 Australians will go through one mental health episode in their entire life. That's actually normal then.
Yeah.
Right.
It's more than normal. Like it's the expectation that either you are, or every single one of your friends is going to go through it.
Sure.
That's basically the average. If you've got 5 friends, you're all going to, either you get it or all your friends are going to get it.
Sure. And props to the one person that doesn't get it, right?
Yeah.
It's like, cool. But everyone else will go through something, because anxiety is really just worry. And we all go through it. But sometimes the worry can take over, and it becomes overthinking. The magician in us decides to, as opposed to being introspective and being very systems orientated, he'll overthink everything. And how do we put that back into center, and how do we stay grounded? And what helps is having that support network. That's why I'm happy to promote MKP, because it allows guys to express how they feel and be in a safe space, or having the courage to go to the GP. Like I'll be honest here, like I saw a GP during COVID last year because my mental health was starting to deteriorate. And even going to this men's work, I was able to do that as well. And I'm grateful for it. Because I learnt a little bit more about myself. The biggest thing I had learnt was, if I'm not present, which has probably been 95% of my life leading up to now, I tyrannize people, and I tyrannize myself because of my level of perfection. So when that person's not living in my perfect world, I will tyrannize that person, and I'll think the terrible thoughts about them. But how we treat others is how we're treating ourselves. So
it's just a projection of
straight up, it's a projection. So imagine what I'm doing to myself. So that's why every time I go to therapy, or every time I go to men's work, I end up finding these little bits about myself. And it allows me, when other people have gone through stuff, to connect with them, which is probably where I didn't know who I was. I'm just Tofe. and I want to connect
Yeah.
more with myself.
Yeah.
And it's just things I happen to do other things. I happen to do talent analytics. I happen to love adventure. I do all these other things, but I have to be okay if they're going away tomorrow.
Yeah. I love that. It almost makes me think, you were talking about, earlier, the square and the circles and all this. And it's, you identify as like, oh, I'm a runner, or I'm a party boy, I'm all this, almost to have the strength to be like, no, I am Tofe, or I am Juan, and these are all the things that I do. But the strength in it is, this is me. This is me as a human with all of the positives and all the challenges and all the negative things. And it's understanding yourself completely, fully, and owning it. Because if you're not going to own it, you're going to end up projecting that, all those other aspects, whether it's anger, the fear, onto others, and then feel that, the shame, the guilt that goes around that across all of your emotions.
Yeah. And that's why I'm happy to say, like, I'm here to connect. That's probably because I know no matter what I do, the connection will always be there. It can all link up to connection.
Yeah. And at one point, 'cause I can't miss out on talking about this, because the book you wrote, which was Everyone Has a Plan Until Shit Hits the Fan. You wrote that book in what period of time?
So I started writing it when my mate and I did these 40 events.
Okay, right.
I was blogging our journey. I wanted to document it somehow.
Yep.
And at first it was talking about like what we're doing, what we're eating and that. And then it started to get really philosophical. And I kept all those as well as journal entries and that. I do like to write a bit. And it wasn't until someone had mentioned, when are you going to write this bloody book? And I thought to myself, I have to do big and crazy events. They said, just save that for another book.
That's the next stage. Yeah. Okay. So, so there was obviously the book. There's a lot of that in your life that you went through, and the tribulations and the suffering, and having that perspective. And just to give one final impression for people who are listening as well, all of this obviously is in a personal sense and in relationships. Did you see all of this improvement in yourself reflect positively at work as well? Like, did you see it directly improve your professional work in the way that you interact with other people, the way you communicated, the way you spoke with people?
Yeah, it did, because the intention of writing the book, like the end goal was the reader would be someone that's going through a rut or was potentially even suicidal. And I even open up with the book saying, look, there's more than 130 million books published in this world. There really isn't need for another book, but hopefully this can save someone's life or get someone out of an adversity of some sort. And that I found translates into every aspect of life. So yes, it helped with work in particular, because we're at work more than we are with our loved ones. And work can be a volatile environment. It can be, especially if projects are running late, or if the boss is moody, or someone in the team is moody, whatever it is. It's me understanding that I can connect with that person because of the adversity that they've gone through. And it gives me perspective around that I'm not alone in going through this. So that's probably the big thing, that work can actually be just as high stressful as just the personal life as well. Yeah.
One final thing before I let you go, and kind of getting people around, if they want to find out more, they can sort of check that in. So we'll talk about that. But you mentioned it's an account, Get Away Without Talking About It. You do the meditation in the morning. Are you a morning person, an afternoon person, or a night person? Do you have a routine? And if so, what's that routine that sets you in place for either of those?
Yeah, great question. I used to be a night owl. I used to be be really creative at 2-3 in the morning. And that's why I did it, because that's when my creative juices are flowing.
Yep.
But it wasn't sustainable for my body. And I've just trained my body it was hard at first going to bed earlier, but as opposed to going from bed at 3 in the morning and going straight to 8 o'clock, I just did slow increments. So it's kind of like going to the letterbox, right? Just focus on 3:30, now 12, then midnight. And now I can sleep at 9 o'clock. I aim for 9:30, but I am a morning person these days because I'm able to get my exercise done in the morning. So I have a morning routine. I'm not going to take credit from this, but this is from Jay Shetty's book.
Savers? No, it was a different one?
So
Jay Shetty's Think Like a Monk?
Think Like a Monk, yeah. And he talks about this morning routine called time, time, and it's thankfulness. So I've had this for years, but I'm like, I'm glad I'm on the right path, but it's one thing I'm grateful for every morning. And I have to justify myself. So my body tingles. And the I is insightfulness. So listening to a podcast of some sort or a bunch of reading. And then M is meditation. So I will use a guided meditation app, Insight Timer.
Okay.
Anywhere between 5 to 12 minutes. And then E is exercise as well. So I usually get my podcast and my cycle into work at the same time.
There you go. Okay.
But I do add another one into that. I don't know where it can fit in the acronym, but I make sure my phone is on flight mode when I wake up. And so my phone alarm is the only thing that I see in my phone. And I don't turn it off flight mode until at least I've done 2 or 3 of those, especially the meditation in particular, because the last thing I want to do is wake up, have an influx of notifications, and then the anxiety kicks in, right?
Yep.
Because I've got to get to this. I'm not even doing it for myself. I'm pleasing them first before I please myself, right?
Well, if you don't control the day controls you. It's as simple as that, right? So
yeah,
it's how it works. And it's interesting because I read Jay Shetty's book, and there's another one I've also come across, which is the Savers morning technique as well, the morning routine.
Yep.
And Savers is silence. So it's silence, affirmations, visualizations, exercise, reading, and I think it's savor. I think there's no S at the end. But yeah, I'm somewhere in the middle as well, just trying to. That's silent, because you mentioned it. It's so critical, because for me, I used to be a big person of wake up really early and I'd be like, I'm winning the day. I'd grab the phone and straight away, Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, checking lots of notifications, and I feel productive, but I'm actually not doing anything that's really getting me on with the day. So having it for me on just flight mode and just going, or just do not disturb for me is get up, do my things, just be silent, do my reading, go and do the exercise. And when I'm on the way to exercise, okay, I'll put it on and be able to see what's going on, but still interact with it very, very minimally until post that. Like, absolute game changer from what I used to do before, which is just scroll and just be preoccupied and anxious and thinking about other things. So
interesting.
I cannot say to people more, whether you're a morning person or an afternoon person, just having a block of 2 hours that lets you control the day. Because if not, it'll just get all away from you. And then,
So the S is silence. That's meditation. Is that what it falls under?
It's basically, it's meditation / not speaking, just being in your own presence, basically. Wow. And then the A is the affirmations, which could, basically could be sort of the T, I guess, as well, in Jay Shetty's one. Yeah. And then there'd be your visualizations, exercise, and reading.
Sure. So, can I add on the affirmation?
Of course.
So I have majority of my passwords are an affirmation. So to get into my computer is my biggest shadow, and I'm happy to share this because I'm happy to just keep it real, is for a long time I believed I was unlovable because I was too busy trying to get it from one of my parents.
Yep.
So my password is I'm loved, and it's more from me. Or I might have I'm enough.
Yep.
And when I realize I am enough, like I can look at myself in the mirror and just say I love you, or I am enough, because I am. We are all worthy.
Yep.
And unfortunately, I carried the expectation of this is what it is to be a man, and I was not living up to that standard. Therefore, I'm not enough, and therefore, I'm a dirtbag or whatever. And it's that probably what spiraled into the depression, because I'm not living into what it is to be a man. Because I want to cry so bad, but I was told that I can't cry because that's going to be weakness. And it's also what society taught me as well.
No, we are enough, Tofe. We are enough. And I think that's why we literally the reason we called the podcast Mere Mortals was because, in part, we weren't coming at this we're the experts. We know everything. No, we're 2 individuals with 2 mere mortals who are just wanting to have conversations that we're going to have issues. We're going to stumble on things. We're going to, things are not going to go right. And that's okay. That's fine. We're all kind of being on, if you've read Jay Shetty's book, right? We're on Hotel Earth, right? we're not, you don't own anything. It's kind of all borrowed.
Sure.
Whether it's a borrowed time or the borrowed materials, it's, we're here for a limited time. and to be so preoccupied and anxious about whether it's the future and the past. It's just being a little bit close to the present and just being aware of what's there in front of you and not letting that go to waste. So, Toph, love the conversation. I think there was still more. I was putting a few more notes and I'm like, okay, I'll have to let that go because we just moved on and everything else. But I really enjoyed having this conversation with you. Whether it's professionally, personally, or elsewhere, where can people reach you?
Yeah, I'd say there's two avenues. It'd be either LinkedIn or Instagram. LinkedIn, it's Tophe. Just literally look up Tofe Evans, so Tofe space Evans. And my Instagram is Tofe.Evans. So people can see me professionally and people can see me personally. Beautiful.
And the group as well, do you want to shout them out just in terms of people might want to go to this particular group if they've been listening to it, whether they're a male or a female? Is it Australia-wide?
Sure.
Yeah.
So it's called the Mankind Project, or MKP. It was originally based in America. So they have, for any American listeners, I believe they're in Europe as well and South America. Fortunate enough to know Larry Dawson, the guy that brought it to Australia. It's been gone for 20 to 25 years now, and I think it's 20. And it's a safe space. Now, this is just for men, but there are women's circles as well. It's a safe space for men to share how they feel and to do any work on themselves or any sort of emotional trauma that's stuck in their body that they want to release so that they don't take it out on their partners. And it's also so they can show up with integrity. So that's what I get from it. I show up as the man I want to be. I show up as an accountable man, and I show up as a man that I can trust as well. And to be around that beautiful community of guys that have my back, that I have their back as well, where we can learn from. And so, yeah.
Beautiful. Toph, thank you very much.